I still remember her tiny hand holding my finger when she was 4, promising I'd always be her hero. But in that cold Springfield courtroom, my 11-year-old daughter looked the judge straight in the eye and said words that shattered my world. "I want to stay with my stepdad. He's stronger. My dad doesn't fight for anything." I lost her that day, not to death, but to something that felt just as final. A man declared inadequate by the court, a father erased from his daughter's life. For 15 years I disappeared into a fog of shame and resignation, watching from a distance as another man raised my child, until the day a battered truck pulled into my garage, and its owner, a retired fighter with knowing eyes, said 8 words that would change everything. "Man who keeps his head down eventually breaks his neck." What began as desperate training in an abandoned warehouse somehow led me to the most unlikely place, the UFC octagon at 58 years old, with my estranged daughter watching from the crowd. But the real fight wasn't for a championship belt. It was for something far more precious that I'd lost years ago. If you've ever felt invisible, forgotten, or like it's too late to reclaim what matters most, this is a story you need to hear. Follow our channel for more true stories that prove it's never too late to fight for redemption. Like, comment, and share from wherever you're watching, because everyone deserves a second chance to become the person they were meant to be. I remember her tiny hand holding my finger. She must have been about 4 years old then. She told me she wanted me to walk her down the aisle someday, said that if she ever got lost, all she had to do was call my name and I'd find her. But there, in that stuffy Springfield courthouse with the sun hitting the dirty window behind her, my daughter looked at the judge and pointed her finger, not at me, but at the man who destroyed my family. "I want to stay with my stepdad. He's stronger. My dad doesn't fight for anything." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just felt a dry heat in my chest, a silence so heavy it felt like it was killing me from the inside. My name was just a scribble on documents. My face just another blur on that defendant's bench. I wasn't an alcoholic, I wasn't violent, but I also wasn't enough. I lost custody of her without scandal. I just walked out of the courtroom with my head down, while the other man smiled and put his arm around her shoulders. My daughter, the one who used to say my smell was the safest place in the world. That afternoon when I entered my small room at the back of the garage where I worked as a mechanic, I sat on the cold floor and stared at the ceiling for hours. She was right. I wasn't man enough to fight even for myself. It's been 15 years since that day. 15 years since I heard Judge Cavendish call me an inadequate presence in my daughter's life. Emily was only 11 then. Old enough to testify, they said. Old enough to choose. And she chose him, Richard Blackwell, the investment banker who'd been dating my ex-wife for just 18 months. The man with the tailored suit and the Harvard degree hanging in his downtown office. The man who played tennis with her on weekends and took her to Broadway shows. "You understand the court's decision, Mr. Lancaster?" the judge had asked me, peering over her glasses. I nodded like a broken puppet. What was I supposed to say? That I worked 60-hour weeks at Donovan's auto shop to pay child support? That I couldn't afford tennis lessons or Broadway tickets on a mechanic's salary? That every other weekend I got with Emily, I tried to make special with trips to the lake or homemade pancakes shaped like animals? The truth was simpler, and Emily had said it perfectly. I didn't fight. Not when Sarah left me for Richard. Not when they moved Emily to the fancy part of Springfield. Not when they started forgetting our scheduled visits. I just accepted it all with a quiet resignation, thinking that was what good men did. They stepped aside. They didn't make scenes. And there, on that cold floor in my room that smelled of motor oil and frozen dinners with Emily's words still burning in my ears, I did something I'd never done before. I took a notebook page and wrote, "I became a mistake" on it, taped it to the wall, stared at it every day. For a while, that was all I was. The following morning, I called the courthouse to ask about appealing the decision. The clerk's voice was tired, uninterested. "You'd need to prove significant change in circumstances, sir, or evidence of endangerment to the child." I had neither, just a broken heart and empty pockets. That night, I dreamed of Emily's 5th birthday. I'd built her a dollhouse from scratch, painting tiny rooms and gluing miniature furniture. When she'd opened it, her eyes lit up like Christmas lights. "Daddy, it's perfect," she'd squealed, throwing her arms around my neck. I woke up with wet cheeks and a hollow chest. I started working more hours, sleeping less. The garage owner, Tom Donovan, noticed but didn't say much. Just slid me the keys to more challenging jobs, the kind that required total focus. "You got the steadiest hands in the shop, Jack," he'd say, patting my shoulder. I was grateful for the distraction. Weeks turned to months. I'd drive by her school sometimes, parking across the street just to catch a glimpse of her at recess. One day I saw her walking with Richard, wearing a private school uniform I couldn't afford, laughing at something he said. They looked like a glossy magazine ad, perfect and untouchable. I never got out of my truck. The child support payments kept going out, but the visitation weekends dwindled. There was always something. A recital I wasn't told about until after. A sleepover at a friend's house. A sudden cold. I knew what was happening, but I still didn't fight. Just sent birthday cards that went unanswered and left voicemails that were never returned. One night, about a year after the custody hearing, my phone rang. It was Emily. My heart nearly stopped. "Dad?" Her voice sounded small, uncertain. "I left my science project at your place last time. It's due tomorrow." "I'll bring it right over," I said, already grabbing my keys. It was nearly midnight. I drove across town, the shoebox project beside me. When I pulled up to their house, a 2-story colonial with perfect landscaping, the porch light flicked on. Richard came out, not Emily. "She's asleep," he said, taking the box. Then with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "Don't worry, I'll tell her you helped save the day." As I walked back to my truck, I heard him mutter something. It sounded like pathetic. Maybe it was. Maybe I was. But that night, as I drove home through the empty streets of Springfield, something inside me finally cracked open. Not with a roar, but with a whisper. I pulled over, turned off the engine, and for the first time since losing Emily, I let myself really feel it all. The rage, the helplessness, the shame. I pounded the steering wheel until my palms stung, screamed until my throat was raw, and when there was nothing left, I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. A broken man with tired eyes and graying temples. "Is this all you're ever going to be?" I asked myself. The silence that followed was deafening. That was the night I decided. If I couldn't be the father Emily wanted, I'd become the man I needed to be. Not for her, not anymore. For me, even if she never saw it, even if no one did. I just never imagined where that decision would lead me, or that 15 years later, my daughter would be watching me step into a cage to fight for a championship that no one, especially me, ever thought I could win. In the years that followed, I did everything I could to avoid mirrors. My eyes stayed low, my shoulders hunched forward like I was perpetually bracing for a blow. I kept working at Donovan's auto shop, sleeping poorly, eating whatever wouldn't take too much effort to prepare. Canned soup, microwave burritos, the kind of food that keeps you alive but doesn't exactly make you feel like living. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of Emily through social media, smiling next to her stepfather, now promoted to dad. She called him that publicly. It burned like acid in my chest, eating away at whatever was left of my heart. I never commented on her posts, never reached out, just watched from the digital shadows as my daughter grew up without me. The small room behind the garage became my entire world. I covered the walls with car manuals and old calendars, anything to hide that phrase I'd written in my darkest moment. But even though I couldn't see it anymore, I knew it was there, hiding beneath a Pennzoil poster. I became a mistake. Some nights I'd lie awake and swear I could see the words glowing through the paper like a neon sign. Winter turned to spring, spring to summer. The seasons changed, but I remained frozen in time. Tom started giving me concerned looks whenever I'd work late into the night. "You got somewhere to be, Jack?" he'd ask. The truth was, I didn't. Not anymore. One Tuesday in October, I remember because the leaves were falling and clogging the storm drains outside the shop, a new customer came in. He drove a battered Ford F-150 that sounded like it was on its last legs. "Transmission shot," I told him after a quick inspection. "Gonna take a few days to fix." He nodded, not seeming particularly bothered. "Take your time." There was something odd about him. Not his size, though he was built like a brick wall, all broad shoulders and thick forearms covered in faded tattoos. It was his stillness, the way he seemed perfectly comfortable just standing there, watching me work without feeling the need to fill the silence with small talk. "You always look at the ground when you talk?" he asked suddenly. I glanced up, surprised. "Excuse me?" "Your eyes. They never leave the floor, like you're expecting to find something down there." He wasn't smiling, but there wasn't any malice in his voice either. Just observation. I shrugged, uncomfortable with being seen so clearly. Just a habit. He studied me for a moment longer, then said something that stuck to my soul like rust. Man who keeps his head down too long eventually breaks his neck. I smiled politely, hoping he'd leave it at that. He did, handing me his keys and contact information before walking out. But those words followed me for the rest of the day, echoing in my head as I worked on his transmission. What did he know about keeping your head down? About braking? About necks? His name was Mike Harmon, according to his paperwork. When he came back to pick up his truck 3 days later, I noticed the gym bag in his hand. It had a logo I didn't recognize, some kind of octagon with the letters MMA inside. Fix the transmission, I told him, wiping my hands on a rag. Should be good for another 50,000 miles. He nodded, handed me his credit card. You did good work. Fast too. It's what I do. As I was processing his payment, he said, I run a gym over on Westfield Street. You should come by sometime. I almost laughed. Me? In a gym? Thanks, but I'm not really the workout type. Mike's eyes narrowed slightly. Didn't ask if you were the type. Just said you should come by. He handed me a business card. First session's free. No pressure. I took the card automatically, stuffing it in my pocket without looking at it. I appreciate the offer, but you're comfortable being uncomfortable, he finished for me. I get it. Comfort zone's a dangerous place, though. It's where dreams go to die. Something about his bluntness irritated me. Who was this guy to waltz in and start dispensing life advice? I'll keep that in mind, I said. My voice clipped as I handed him his receipt. Mike didn't seem bothered by my dismissal. He just collected his keys and headed for the door. Before leaving, he turned back. Sometimes the hardest fight is just showing up, Lancaster. Tuesday nights, 7 o'clock. No excuses. I watched his truck pull away, then went back to work. Tried to forget about his invitation. But over the next few days, I kept finding that business card. It would fall out of my pocket when I was changing clothes, appear on my bedside table when I was reaching for my alarm, even showed up between the pages of the manual I was reading one night. The following Tuesday, I found myself driving past his gym after work. I didn't stop, just slowed down enough to peer through the windows. Inside, I could see men and women of all ages working out, some on equipment, others sparring on mats. They looked alive, purposeful, everything I wasn't. This routine continued for weeks. Drive by, slow down, keep going. Until one evening, Mike was standing outside when I drove past. Our eyes met. He didn't wave or call out, just stood there, arms crossed, like he'd been expecting me all along. That night, I couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about what Emily had said in that courtroom. He doesn't fight for anything. And she'd been right. I hadn't fought for my marriage. Hadn't fought for my custody rights. Hadn't fought for anything that mattered. The next Tuesday, I parked my truck in front of Harmon's Mixed Martial Arts Academy. Sat there for 20 minutes, engine off, debating whether to go inside. What was I doing here? I was a 43-year-old mechanic with bad knees and a worse attitude. This was ridiculous. But then I thought about going back to that room, about staring at the walls, about waking up another day as the same broken man. I got out of the truck. The gym smelled of sweat and determination. Men and women were training in different areas, some hitting heavy bags, others grappling on mats, a few doing exercises I couldn't even name. Mike spotted me immediately, but didn't make a big deal of it. Just nodded for me to join him on a bench near the back. Thought you'd never show up, he said, handing me a pair of hand wraps. I'm not here to fight, I clarified quickly. Just to watch. Mike raised an eyebrow. Everyone's here to fight something, Lancaster. Some just haven't figured out what yet. He gestured toward the training floor. Sit, watch, but know this. Watching never changed a damn thing. I took a seat on the worn wooden bench, as far from the action as possible. The fighters moved with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. There was something raw and honest about them. No pretense, no facades, just humans pushing against their limits. As I watched a young woman practicing a series of strikes, Mike sat down beside me. You know what I see when I look at you, Jack? A middle-aged mechanic who shouldn't be here? He shook his head. I see someone who's been knocked down but hasn't quite accepted it yet. You're not defeated. You're just paused. Those words hit me harder than any physical blow could have. I looked away, uncomfortable with being read so easily. "You don't need to win any fights," Mike continued, his voice quieter now. "You just need to learn how to take a hit and stay standing." It was an invitation, not to become a champion, not to prove anything to anyone else, just to find out if I was still alive somewhere underneath all that resignation. "I don't know the first thing about fighting," I admitted. Mike's weathered face broke into a smile. "Good. Means you don't have any bad habits to unlearn." The first time I stepped onto the mat, I nearly apologized to the floor. I felt ridiculous, old, fragile, like a broken toy someone had dragged out of storage and expected to function again. The gym was practically empty that morning. Mike had suggested we start at 5 a.m. before the regular crowd arrived. "Less eyes," he'd said, understanding my pride without me having to explain it. The rubber mat felt strange beneath my feet, springy yet solid. I wore an old Springfield High t-shirt and basketball shorts I'd found at the bottom of a drawer, relics from a time when I still cared about how I looked. My sneakers were paint-stained work shoes that had never seen the inside of a gym. "First things first," Mike said, tossing me a jump rope. 5 minutes, non-stop. I almost laughed. Jump rope? I'd done that as a kid. How hard could it be? The answer came quickly. Impossibly hard. After 30 seconds, my calves were burning. At 1 minute, my lungs felt like they were filling with concrete. By 2 minutes, sweat was pouring down my face, stinging my eyes. I kept tripping over the rope, cursing under my breath. "Don't stop," Mike said each time, his voice firm but not unkind. "You stop when the timer stops." When the 5 minutes finally ended, I doubled over, hands on my knees, gasping for air. My shirt was soaked through, my legs trembling. I couldn't remember the last time I'd pushed my body this hard. Maybe never. "Water," Mike said, handing me a bottle. Small sips. As I drank, he studied me with those penetrating eyes of his. "Your body's trying to tell you to quit," he observed. "What are you going to tell it back?" I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand. To shut up, I managed between breaths. The ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Good answer. Now, let's learn how to stand." The next hour was a lesson in humility. Mike showed me the proper fighting stance, feet shoulder-width apart, weight evenly distributed, hands up to protect my face. It seemed simple enough until he started correcting me. My shoulders were too tense, my chin was too high, my elbows flared out, my knees locked. "Your body's been carrying your grief for so long it's forgotten how to stand up straight," he said, adjusting my posture for what felt like the 100th time. "We're retraining everything." By the end of that first session, my muscles were screaming. Every movement felt like sandpaper against raw nerves. But something else was happening too. A strange clarity was cutting through the fog that had surrounded me for years. The physical discomfort was so immediate, so demanding, that it left no room for the emotional pain that had become my constant companion. "Same time tomorrow," Mike said as I limped toward the door. It wasn't a question. I nodded, too exhausted to speak. That night I slept better than I had in years. A deep, dreamless sleep that my body had been craving. When my alarm went off at 4:15 a.m., every fiber of my being protested. My knees ached. My shoulders throbbed. My stomach muscles felt like they'd been worked over with a meat tenderizer. For a long moment I lay there staring at the ceiling. It would be so easy to roll over, to go back to sleep, to text Mike with some excuse. He'd understand, probably expected it even. But then I thought about the jump rope, about those 5 minutes that felt like 5 hours, about the small victory of finishing something I thought I couldn't do. I got up. Day after day I returned to the gym. The routine became a lifeline, something to hold on to when the nights got too quiet and the memories too loud. Jump rope, shadow boxing, basic combinations on the heavy bag, core exercises that made me curse Mike's name with every repetition. I never mentioned Emily. No one at the gym knew about her, about the custody battle, about the hole in my chest that never quite closed. But every punch I threw carried her name. Every drop of sweat felt like a prayer. I trained as if I were conducting a silent conversation with God, asking for something I couldn't quite name. One morning, about 3 weeks in, Mike had me hitting mitts, practicing combinations while he held up padded targets. Left jab, right cross, left hook. The rhythmic sound of my gloves connecting with the mitts echoed through the empty gym. Thwap, thwap, thwap. "Harder," Mike commanded. "Put your body into it." I tried, throwing my shoulder behind a right cross. "Harder," he repeated, his voice rising. "You're still holding back." Frustration bubbled up inside me. I was giving it everything I had. What more did he want? I said harder, Mike barked, stepping forward with the mitts. Stop treating these like they're made of glass. Hit them like they owe you something. Something inside me snapped. All the rage, all the helplessness, all the years of swallowed pride, it all came pouring out in one explosive right hand that sent Mike stumbling backward. The gym fell silent. I stood there, chest heaving, horrified at what I'd done. Had I hurt him? Would he kick me out? Was this the end of whatever this strange journey was? But Mike was smiling, a real smile this time, not the guarded one I'd grown accustomed to. There it is, he said quietly. There's the fire. We continued training, but something had shifted. I hit harder, moved faster, breathed deeper. It was as if a dam had broken inside me, releasing energy I hadn't known I possessed. That evening, as I was unwrapping my hands, Mike sat down beside me. "Why are you really here, Jack?" he asked, his voice gentle but probing. I stared at the floor, watching drops of sweat create tiny dark circles on the concrete. The truth was, I didn't fully know myself. To stop disappearing, I finally said. To feel something, anything. Mike nodded slowly. That's a start, but at some point, you're going to need a better reason. Like what? Like living again, not just existing. The words hung in the air between us, challenging and uncomfortable. I didn't respond. Couldn't. One day, during a particularly grueling training session, it happened. The room started spinning. My vision tunneled. My legs turned to water. And then, darkness. I woke up on a folding cot in Mike's office, a cold compress on my forehead. He was sitting nearby, watching me with concern etched on his weathered face. "What happened?" I croaked, trying to sit up. "You pushed too hard. Dehydration, probably. Maybe low blood sugar." He handed me a sports drink. "Sip this." As the sugary liquid hit my system, memories came flooding back. The training session, the dizziness, the collapse. Embarrassment washed over me in a hot wave. I'd failed. Again. "Maybe this isn't for me," I muttered, avoiding his gaze. "Maybe I'm too old for this." "Maybe," Mike agreed, surprising me. "Training like this isn't for everyone, especially not at your age." He paused, studying me. "Might be better if you stop." His words stung more than I expected. After weeks of pushing me, he was giving up? Just like that? "No," I said, the word out before I could think about it. It wasn't a shout or a plea, just a simple refusal. "I'm not stopping." "Why not?" Mike challenged. "Give me one good reason." I opened my mouth, then closed it again. What could I say that wouldn't sound pathetic? That I needed this? That without these morning sessions, I'd slip back into the gray half-life I'd been living? "For me," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "And for her, even if she never sees it." Mike's expression softened almost imperceptibly. He didn't ask who she was, didn't press for details, just nodded once, accepting my answer for what it was. A confession and a commitment all at once. "Get some rest tonight," he said, standing up. "We start lighter tomorrow. Build back up slowly." He headed for the door, then paused. "And Jack? Yeah? Bring a better breakfast next time. Your body's trying to build something new. Give it the right materials." I moved into an old warehouse behind Mike's gym about 6 months after I started training. The place had been abandoned for years, a forgotten relic from Springfield's manufacturing heyday with high ceilings, exposed brick walls, and windows so dirty they filtered the sunlight into sepia tones. It wasn't meant to be living space, but it had running water, electricity, and enough room for a mattress, a mini fridge, and the few possessions I cared about. Mike had mentioned it casually one day after training. "Building owner's a friend of mine. Says you can stay there if you help with maintenance. Beats paying rent." I didn't tell him I'd been living in my truck for the past 3 weeks, after Tom had to cut my hours at the garage. Didn't mention that I'd been showering at the gym and eating 1 meal a day to make ends meet. Somehow Mike knew without me saying a word. That was his gift, seeing what others tried to hide. The warehouse became my sanctuary. I cleaned it up, patched holes in the walls, fixed the plumbing. It was therapeutic, rebuilding a space while trying to rebuild myself. At night, I'd lie on my mattress, listening to the distant sounds of traffic and train whistles, feeling my body change with each passing day. I was losing weight, gaining muscle, discovering sinews and tendons I never knew existed. My face in the small bathroom mirror was becoming leaner, more defined, the softness of middle age giving way to something harder, more deliberate. My routine became my religion. Up at 4 a.m., train until 7, work at the garage until 6 p.m., back to the gym until 9, eat, sleep, repeat. I lost touch with the few acquaintances I'd managed to keep after the divorce, lost track of holidays and birthdays, lost interest in anything that didn't contribute directly to the transformation taking place inside my skin. Tom, my boss at the garage, watched this change with growing concern. One afternoon, as I was finishing up an oil change, he approached me, wiping his hands on a greasy rag. "What's going on with you, Jack?" he asked, his voice gruff with worry. "You're different lately, distracted." I straightened up, wincing as my sore muscles protested. "Just trying something new, Tom. Nothing to worry about." He frowned, unconvinced. "This about Emily? You trying to get her back or something?" The question caught me off guard. I hadn't spoken Emily's name aloud in so long. Hearing it from someone else's lips felt like a violation. "No," I said, perhaps too quickly. "This isn't about her." Tom studied me, his eyes narrowing beneath bushy gray eyebrows. "Then what is it about? Because from where I'm standing it looks like some kind of midlife crisis. This fighting stuff, it's for young guys, frustrated punks, not men our age." His words stung, but I kept my face neutral. "I appreciate the concern, Tom. Really. But I'm fine." "Fine?" He snorted. "You're living in an abandoned warehouse, for Christ's sake. You look like you've lost 30 pounds. You've got bruises on your face half the time. That's not fine, Jack. That's a man spiraling." I felt heat rising in my chest. Not embarrassment, but a slow-burning anger I was still learning to recognize. "Is my work suffering?" I asked, my voice deliberately calm. "Well, no, but then with all due respect, Tom, how I spend my time outside of this garage isn't really your concern." He took a step back, surprised by my directness. In all the years he'd known me, I'd never pushed back, never stood my ground. I'd always been the one to apologize, to accommodate, to bend. "Just looking out for you," he muttered, already turning away. "That's all." I watched him go, a strange mixture of guilt and satisfaction swirling in my gut. It wasn't that I wanted to hurt Tom's feelings. He'd been good to me over the years, better than most. But for once, I wasn't going to apologize for the choices I was making. For once, I was following my own compass, even if I wasn't entirely sure where it was leading me. Later that week, scrolling through social media during a rare moment of downtime, I saw a news headline that made my blood run cold. Springfield financial advisor Richard Blackwell under investigation for fraud. Richard, Emily's stepfather, the man who had taken my place. The article detailed allegations of a Ponzi scheme that had defrauded clients of millions of dollars. There was a photo of Richard being escorted from his office by federal agents, his perfect suit wrinkled, his handsome face ashen with fear. My first impulse was a twisted kind of joy, a dark satisfaction at seeing the mighty fall. Here was the man who had everything I'd lost, facing the kind of public humiliation that could destroy a life. For a brief, shameful moment, I savored it. But then I thought of Emily. She was 26 now, working as a nurse in Boston according to her social media. How would this affect her? What would this public disgrace do to the family unit that had replaced me? I almost reached for my phone, almost called her, almost offered, what? Comfort? Support? I had no right, no place in her life anymore, and my sudden reappearance in the wake of her stepfather's disgrace would look exactly like what it was. Opportunistic and self-serving. So I didn't call, didn't text, just closed the article and went back to training, hitting the heavy bag with renewed intensity, each impact echoing through the empty gym like a question without an answer. Days turned to weeks. I found myself checking the news regularly for updates on Richard's case, wondering about the ripple effects in Emily's life. Was she standing by him? Had she been blindsided like everyone else? The questions haunted me, but I kept my distance. This wasn't my story to enter. One evening after a particularly grueling sparring session with Mike, he pulled me aside. "There's a small exhibition bout happening next month," he said casually, as if discussing the weather. "Nothing official, just local guys testing themselves. Thought you might be interested." I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. "You want me to fight? In front of people? Been training over a year now." He shrugged. "Time to see what you've learned." The thought sent a cold spike of fear through me. Training in private was one thing. Putting myself out there, risking failure in public view, that was something else entirely. "I'm not ready," I said, the words automatic. Mike's expression didn't change. "Nobody ever feels ready for their first fight. That's not how this works." "I'm 44 years old, Mike. These other guys, age bracket's 40 plus, he cut in. "You won't be fighting any youngsters." I fell silent, searching for other excuses, finding none that didn't sound like cowardice even to my own ears. "Think about it," Mike said, clapping me on the shoulder. "This isn't about winning. It's about stepping through that door." He gestured vaguely toward the gym entrance. "The one you've been standing in front of all this time." That night, lying on my mattress in the warehouse, watching headlights trace patterns on the ceiling, I thought about doors, about thresholds, about the difference between training for something and actually doing it. What was I really preparing for all these months? What invisible opponent was I fighting in my mind? The questions circled like vultures, patient and relentless. And somewhere in that restless night, as the moon cast long shadows across my sparse living space, I made a decision that would change everything, though I couldn't possibly know it then. I would fight, not to win, not to prove anything to anyone else, but to answer a question that had been haunting me since that day in the courthouse. Was I still capable of standing up when it mattered? On the day of the weigh-in, I saw my name on the digital display board at the Springfield Community Center. Not Mr., not Emily's dad, not the mechanic from 9th Street. It was my full name, Jack Lancaster. Those two words, glowing in blue LED against black, hit me with unexpected force. I stood there staring at them, feeling a strange tightness in my throat. When was the last time my name had been displayed anywhere? When was the last time my existence had been acknowledged in any public way? The community center's basement had been transformed for the event. Folding chairs lined the walls, a makeshift ring stood in the center, and a small table with a digital scale had been set up near the entrance. Local fighters milled about, some nervous, others projecting confidence they may or may not have felt. At 44, I wasn't the oldest competitor, but I was close. "Lancaster," the event coordinator called, checking his clipboard. "You're up." I stepped onto the scale, acutely aware of my body in a way I'd never been before. 14 months of training had reshaped me. The soft, middle-aged spread was gone, replaced by lean muscle and sinew. I'd dropped nearly 50 pounds, my face had hollowed, and the gray in my beard and temples somehow looked deliberate rather than defeated. The digital readiness flashed. 185.4, perfect for the middleweight division. "All good," the coordinator nodded, making a note. "You're fighting Ray Mercer tomorrow night, third bout on the card." I'd heard of Mercer, a former college wrestler turned local MMA coach. Younger than me by about 5 years, with more experience and a reputation for aggressive ground game. My stomach tightened at the thought. As I stepped away from the scale, a young woman approached me, mid-20s, press badge dangling from a lanyard around her neck, notebook in hand. "Mr. Lancaster, I'm Alicia Chen from the Springfield Gazette. Mind if I ask you a few questions?" I hesitated, caught off guard. Why would anyone want to interview me? Sure, I managed, suddenly conscious of my worn gym clothes and weathered appearance. She clicked her pen, ready to write. "This is your first competitive fight, correct? What brings a man your age into the ring for the first time?" The question hung in the air between us, deceptively simple yet impossibly complex. What could I say that wouldn't sound pathetic or cliched? That I was trying to rebuild myself piece by piece. That I was searching for something I'd lost years ago in a courtroom. That sometimes waking up and facing another day felt like its own kind of fight. "I'm looking to be seen," I said finally, the words surprising even me with their honesty. Her pen paused mid-stroke. "Seen?" she repeated, brow furrowing. "Just that?" I nodded, then turned and walked away, leaving her standing there with her unfinished interview. I didn't have the energy or the words to explain further. Some truths are too raw for casual conversation. Mike was waiting near the exit, arms crossed, expression unreadable as always. "How's the weight?" he asked as I approached. "On point," I replied. "Coordinator says I'm fighting Mercer." He nodded, unsurprised. "Figured as much. He's good on the ground. Been competing since his 30s. Any advice?" "Keep it standing. Your boxing's better than his. Don't let him take you down." He paused, studying me. "You nervous?" I considered lying, then thought better of it. "Terrified." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Good. Means you care about the outcome." He checked his watch. "Get some rest. Early night tonight." Tomorrow's going to come faster than you think. Back at the warehouse, I tried to follow his advice. Laid out my gear for the next day. Ate a light meal of grilled chicken and steamed vegetables. Stretched my perpetually tight muscles. But sleep remained elusive, my mind racing with scenarios of what could happen in that ring. Would I freeze? Get knocked out in seconds? Make a fool of myself? As I tossed and turned on my mattress, my phone buzzed with a text notification. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, then curiosity won out. The message was brief. You're really going to humiliate yourself like this? My blood ran cold. The text had come from Emily's number. I recognized it instantly, though I hadn't received anything from it in years. But was it actually Emily? Or Richard using her phone? The tone suggested the latter, but I couldn't be sure. I stared at those words until they blurred before my eyes. Humiliation. It was the specter that had haunted me since the custody hearing, the fear of being judged and found wanting, of having my inadequacies exposed for all to see. And now, on the eve of stepping into that ring, those old fears had found their way back to me, wrapped in a text from a number I'd once memorized by heart. My thumb hovered over the screen. I could respond, could ask who was really texting, could defend myself or explain or plead my case. But what would that accomplish? Instead, I deleted the message, let the phone drop onto the mattress beside me, closed my eyes and focused on my breathing the way Mike had taught me. In through the nose, out through the mouth, slow and deliberate. The text had shaken me, but something else was happening too, a realization forming like a crystal in the darkness. Whoever sent that message, Emily or Richard, was still watching me, still aware of my existence. I wasn't as forgotten as I'd thought. And whether the emotion behind that text was contempt or concern, it meant I was visible again, for better or worse. Morning came with the harsh buzz of my alarm. 5 a.m. Fight day. I rose mechanically, going through the routines that had become second nature, stretching, light breakfast, gentle warm-up exercises. The text from the night before hovered at the edges of my consciousness, but I pushed it aside. Today wasn't about the past. It was about the present moment, the immediate challenge ahead. Mike picked me up at noon. The fight wasn't until 7 p.m., but he wanted me at the venue early, to acclimate to the space, to settle my nerves. We drove in silence, the radio off, each lost in our own thoughts. As we pulled into the community center parking lot, I noticed it was filling up quickly. More spectators than I'd expected for an amateur exhibition. Looks like a good turnout, I observed, trying to keep my voice casual. Mike nodded. Word got around. Local guy coming out of nowhere, taking on established fighters. People are curious. The idea that strangers might be interested in my story, or at least the public version of it, was bizarre. For years I'd been invisible, a ghost drifting through the edges of Springfield. Now suddenly I was a point of curiosity. A novelty act perhaps, but seen nonetheless. Inside, the energy was building. Fighters warming up in corners, event staff arranging last-minute details, early spectators claiming the best seats. I changed into my fight shorts and rash guard in a small locker room that smelled of disinfectant and nervous sweat. When I emerged, Mike was waiting with hand wraps and focus mitts. "Let's get you warm," he said, leading me to a quieter corner of the backstage area. As we went through familiar combinations, jab, cross, hook, uppercut, I found my anxiety giving way to a strange calm. This at least I knew. This I had practiced thousands of times. My body remembered, even if my mind still doubted. The first two fights came and went in a blur of announcements and cheers. Then the coordinator was calling my name, telling me I was on deck. Mike wrapped my gloves, checked the Velcro straps, looked me in the eye. "Remember why you're here," he said quietly. "Not for them. For you." I nodded, unable to speak past the knot in my throat. As I walked toward the ring, the light seemed too bright, the crowd too loud. My heart hammered in my chest, threatening to burst through my ribs. And then, in the midst of that sensory overload, I saw her. Third row, left side, Emily, my daughter. Not a child anymore, but a grown woman, watching me with an expression I couldn't read from this distance. Beside her, an empty seat. No Richard. She'd come alone. The sight of her nearly stopped me in my tracks. I hadn't prepared for this possibility. Hadn't allowed myself to even imagine it. What was she doing here? How had she known? What did she expect to see? There was no time to process these questions. The announcer was calling my name, the crowd was applauding politely, and my opponent was already in the ring, bouncing on the balls of his feet, eyes locked on me like a predator sizing up prey. I climbed through the ropes, feeling simultaneously present and detached, as if watching myself from a distance. The referee called us to the center, gave instructions I barely heard. Mercer nodded confidently, his gaze never leaving mine. I stared back, no longer looking at the ground, no longer apologizing for my existence. The bell rang. The fight began, and in that moment, with my daughter watching and my past behind me, I stepped forward to meet whatever came next. The gymnasium was packed to capacity. The crowd's roar filled my ears like ocean waves crashing against cliffs, distant yet overwhelming. Fluorescent lights beat down from above, casting harsh shadows across the canvas. I could feel the vibration of hundreds of feet stomping on the bleachers, the collective energy of strangers who had come to witness violence as entertainment. But all of that faded into background noise as my focus narrowed to the man across from me, and the knowledge that my daughter was watching from somewhere in that blur of faces. Mercer circled left, light on his feet despite his solid build. His eyes, calculating, experienced, never left mine. In them I saw something familiar, the look of a predator who had sized up his prey and found it wanting. It was the same expression Richard had worn in that courtroom years ago, the same dismissive assessment that had deemed me insufficient, not enough of a threat to be taken seriously. The first punch came faster than I expected, a sharp jab that split my guard and glanced off my forehead. The impact snapped my head back, sending a jolt of pain down my spine. Instinctively, I stepped backward, creating distance. Mercer smiled, sensing weakness. He pressed forward, throwing a combination jab, cross, hook that forced me against the ropes. "Move!" I heard Mike shout from my corner. "Don't stand still." I tried to circle away, but Mercer cut off the angle, backing me into a corner. His confidence was growing with each exchange, his strikes becoming more committed. A right hook caught me on the temple, momentarily blurring my vision. The crowd's noise swelled, sensing blood. "He's too old for this," someone shouted, drawing scattered laughter. The comment stung worse than the punches. I'd heard variations of it my entire life. Too passive, too quiet, too accepting, too old. Always some version of not enough. Mercer shot for a takedown, driving his shoulder into my midsection. The air left my lungs in a violent rush as my back hit the canvas. Now he was on top, where he wanted to be, where his wrestling background gave him the advantage. His weight settled on my chest, heavy and suffocating. I could feel the fight slipping away before it had really begun. "Bridge and roll." Mike's voice cut through the noise. "Don't give him control." I bucked my hips, trying to displace Mercer's weight, but he adjusted smoothly, transitioning to side control. His forearm pressed against my throat, not enough to choke, but enough to restrict my breathing. Panic flickered at the edges of my consciousness, a primal fear of being pinned, of being helpless. And then, in that moment of desperation, something shifted inside me. A memory surfaced. Emily at 5 years old, struggling to ride her bike without training wheels, falling, crying, looking to me for permission to quit. And my words to her, "It's okay to be scared. It's not okay to let being scared stop you." I hadn't lived by those words in so long, had forgotten them until this moment. With a surge of strength that surprised even me, I created space between our bodies, trapped his arm, and executed the sweep Mike had drilled into me hundreds of times. Suddenly our positions were reversed. Mercer on his back, me in guard position. The surprise on his face was almost comical. The crowd's reaction changed, confusion giving way to renewed interest. I could hear Mike shouting encouragement, but it was another voice that cut through the din, higher, feminine, achingly familiar. "Come on, Dad." Emily, calling me Dad. For the first time in 15 years, the sound of it sent electricity through my veins, a second wind when I needed it most. I postured up and landed a solid right hand to Mercer's jaw, then another, and another. Not wild, desperate strikes, but the calculated punches Mike had taught me. Turning my hips, extending through the target, following through. Mercer tried to control my posture, to pull me down into his guard, but I maintained distance, picking my shots. I could see frustration building in his eyes, his game plan unraveling. He'd expected an easy win. A middle-aged novice he could overwhelm with experience and aggression. Instead, he was facing someone who refused to break, who kept coming forward despite the punishment. The bell rang, ending the first round. I returned to my corner, legs shaky, but spirit intact. Mike was there with water and a towel, his expression a mixture of concern and pride. "How's the eye?" he asked, dabbing at a cut above my right eyebrow. "I can see fine," I lied, blinking against the blood trickling into my eye. "You're doing good," Mike said, applying pressure to stop the bleeding. He's getting frustrated. "Stick to the game plan. Keep it on the feet when you can. Use your jab to set up the right hand." I nodded, too winded to speak. My ribs ached where Mercer had landed several hard shots. Tomorrow would be a symphony of bruises and stiffness. But for now, adrenaline dulled the worst of it. "Why are you doing this?" Mike asked suddenly, his voice low so only I could hear. The question caught me off guard. "What? Why are you fighting? Right now, in this moment. Why?" I glanced toward the crowd, trying to locate Emily among the faces. "She's here," I managed between breaths. Mike followed my gaze, understanding dawning in his weathered features. "Your daughter?" I nodded. "Does that change things?" I considered the question, feeling the seconds of the round break ticking away. "No," I said finally. "I'm not fighting for her approval, not anymore." "Then what are you fighting for?" The answer came with surprising clarity. To show her, and myself, that I'm still here, that I didn't disappear. Mike's expression softened into something rarely seen, a genuine smile. "Then get back in there and be seen." The bell rang for round 2. I rose from my stool, rolled my shoulders, and stepped back to the center of the ring. Mercer met me there, his initial cockiness replaced by wary respect. He'd realized this wouldn't be the easy victory he'd anticipated. We touched gloves, a gesture of mutual acknowledgement, and the fight resumed. This time, I didn't retreat, didn't cover up and wait for him to attack. Instead, I pressed forward, throwing the jab Mike had drilled into me thousands of times, establishing distance, creating angles, setting the pace. Mercer adjusted, looking for openings to shoot for another takedown. But now I was ready, sprawling when he dove for my legs, making him pay with short strikes to the sides of his head. The crowd was fully engaged now, the energy in the room shifting as they sensed the underdog finding his footing. Somewhere in that sea of faces, Emily was watching. Not the broken man from the courtroom, head bowed in defeat, but someone new. Or perhaps someone who had been there all along, buried beneath layers of resignation and regret. Someone who stood his ground, who fought back, who refused to disappear. The round ended with us trading blows in the center of the ring, neither giving ground. As I turned toward my corner, I caught a glimpse of her, standing now, her expression a complex mixture of emotions I couldn't fully decipher from this distance. But she was watching, really watching. And for the first time in 15 years, I felt truly seen by my daughter. When the referee raised my arm and the crowd erupted, I heard nothing. The world around me had gone silent, as if someone had pressed mute on reality itself. My body was a constellation of pain, throbbing temples, burning lungs, ribs that protested with each breath. But none of that registered fully. My entire focus had narrowed to a single point in the audience. Emily, standing perfectly still, her lips slightly parted in what looked like shock. Mercer approached, nodding respectfully before clasping my hand. His mouth moved, probably offering congratulations or acknowledgement, but the words didn't reach me. I returned the gesture automatically, my eyes never leaving my daughter's face. The referee guided me back to my corner where Mike waited, pride evident in his usually stoic expression. "You did it," he said, helping me through the ropes. "Split decision. You won." The words sounded distant, unimportant compared to the silent exchange happening across the gymnasium. Emily hadn't moved. While others around her were collecting belongings, heading for exits, she remained rooted to the spot, her gaze locked with mine across the distance. I should go to her, I thought. Should cross the floor, bridge the years of silence between us. But something held me back, not pride or anger, but a deeper understanding that had crystallized during those 3 rounds in the cage. This moment wasn't about forcing reconciliation or demanding recognition. It was about giving her the choice, the space to decide for herself. So I didn't approach, didn't wave or call out, just held her gaze for one long moment before turning away, following Mike toward the locker room. The post-fight examination was brief. The cut above my eye needed 3 stitches. My ribs were bruised but not broken. The doctor recommended rest, ice, Anti-inflammatories, the standard treatment for the standard damage. I nodded, barely listening, my mind still in that gymnasium, still caught in that moment of silent recognition. Back in the locker room, I showered gingerly, wincing as hot water hit fresh bruises, changed into clean clothes, packed my gear with methodical care. By the time I emerged, the gymnasium had emptied, the cleaning crew already breaking down the ring. No sign of Emily. Of course not. What had I expected? Ready? Mike asked, jangling his truck keys. I nodded, ignoring the hollow feeling in my chest. Yeah, let's go. The drive back to the warehouse was quiet. Mike, never one for unnecessary conversation, seemed to sense my need for silence. The Springfield street slipped by outside the window, familiar landmarks rendered strange by the evening shadows. Or perhaps it was me who had changed, seeing the world through different eyes after tonight. You fought well, Mike said finally, as we pulled up to the warehouse. Smart, disciplined, didn't panic when things got tough. Thanks to your training. He shook his head. I just showed you the door. You chose to walk through it. I wanted to tell him how much that meant, how his gruff guidance had become a lifeline when I was drowning. But the words felt inadequate, trivial compared to the debt I owed him. Instead, I simply nodded, hoping he understood what I couldn't express. Get some rest, he said as I climbed out of the truck. We'll talk tomorrow. The warehouse was dark and quiet, the familiar emptiness somehow more pronounced tonight. I moved through it by memory and touch, not bothering with lights. Found the edge of my mattress, lowered myself down with a groan that echoed in the cavernous space. Every muscle in my body was singing with fatigue, a chorus of aches that promised worse tomorrow. But there was something else too, a lightness in my chest, as if some long-carried burden had been set down. I hadn't just survived my first fight, I'd won it, had stood toe-to-toe with a younger, more experienced opponent and refused to break. The victory wasn't just about the judges' scorecards. It was about proving something to myself, that I wasn't finished, that there was still fight left in me. Sleep came easier than expected, deep and dreamless. When I woke the next morning, sunlight was streaming through the high windows, painting golden rectangles on the concrete floor. For a moment I lay still, taking inventory of my injuries. Everything hurt, but in a satisfying way. The earned pain of effort and accomplishment, rather than the hollow ache of regret. I reached for my phone to check the time. 9:47 a.m. Later than I'd slept in years. There were 3 missed calls from Tom at the garage, a text from Mike asking how I was feeling, and several notifications from social media. People I barely knew congratulating me on the fight. Groaning, I swung my legs over the side of the mattress and stood carefully testing my balance. Made my way to the small bathroom. The face in the mirror was a battlefield map. Swollen eye, stitched eyebrow, bruised cheek. I looked like I'd been hit by a truck. Felt like it too. After a shower and some ibuprofen, I ventured outside. The day was bright and crisp, autumn asserting itself in the turning leaves and cool breeze. I paused on the warehouse loading dock, soaking in the simple pleasure of sunlight on my skin, when I noticed something on the ground near the door. A photograph, weathered at the edges, colors slightly faded. I picked it up, turned it over, and felt the air leave my lungs. It was Emily and me. She must have been about 4, sitting on my shoulders at the Springfield Harvest Festival. Her small hands were tangled in my hair, her smile so wide it seemed to take up half her face. I was looking up at her, laughing at something she'd said. On the back, in childish handwriting that had grown more confident over the years. I remember this. I stared at the image for a long time, memories washing over me in waves. The weight of her on my shoulders, the sticky cotton candy she'd insisted on sharing, pressing it against my mouth until I took a bite, the way she'd fallen asleep on the drive home, her small body curled against mine in complete trust. How long had it been since I'd allowed myself to remember these things? How many years had I spent pushing away the good memories along with the painful ones, as if they were too dangerous to revisit? I sat down on the loading dock, legs suddenly unable to support me. The photograph trembled in my hands. I didn't cry, didn't smile, just breathed deeply, feeling something inside me shift and settle, like tectonic plates finding a new configuration after years of pressure. She had been here. While I slept, Emily had come to this place, had left this piece of our shared past as, what? An acknowledgement? A peace offering? A reminder that before the courtroom, Before the bitter words and painful silence, there had been love between us. Whatever her intention, the message was clear. She still carried me with her, still remembered the father I had been before failure and resignation had transformed me into someone neither of us recognized. And somehow, against all odds, that connection had survived 15 years of silence. I carefully placed the photograph in my wallet next to my driver's license, a tangible reminder of identity, of belonging. Then I went inside to call Mike. There was more work to be done, more training to undergo. Last night hadn't been an ending, but a beginning. The first step on a path I was only now learning to walk. What I didn't know then, couldn't have known, was how that path would eventually lead me back to Emily. Not immediately, not completely, but slowly, tentatively, through careful steps and measured words, through text messages that grew from formal to familiar, through coffee meetings that evolved from awkward to comfortable, through the gradual rebuilding of trust that neither of us had believed possible. It would take years. There would be setbacks and misunderstandings, old wounds reopened alongside new connections forged. But sitting there on that loading dock with autumn sunlight warming my bruised face and a faded photograph in my wallet, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 15 years. Hope. Not the desperate, clinging hope of a drowning man, but something calmer, more substantial. The quiet certainty that I hadn't fought to reclaim what was lost. I had fought to become whole again, and in doing so, had opened the door to possibilities I'd long since abandoned. Years have passed since that first fight. My body doesn't tolerate the same punishment it once did. The joints creak more, recover slower. The scars have accumulated, a roadmap of battles won and lost etched across my skin. At 58, I'm far from the physical prime most fighters enjoy. But I've learned that prime isn't always about physical capability. Sometimes it's about timing, about arriving exactly when and where you're meant to be. Springfield has changed too. The old Donovan's Auto Shop is now a craft brewery. The community center where I had my first fight was renovated into a performing arts space. Mike's gym expanded, taking over the adjacent storefronts, adding new equipment and classes. My name is spoken there now, not in whispers of pity but in tones of respect. Sometimes young fighters ask for advice or stories. I give both sparingly, understanding the value of earned wisdom. The UFC Masters Division Championship belt sits on a simple shelf in my apartment, not the warehouse which was eventually condemned and demolished, but a modest one-bedroom near the river. I don't display the belt prominently, don't need to. Its presence is enough. A quiet reminder of that night in Las Vegas when everything I'd worked for culminated in 23 minutes of focused violence and technical precision. The sports writers called it unprecedented, a Cinderella story for the aging athlete. Some even use the word inspiring, though that always makes me uncomfortable. I didn't fight for inspiration or admiration. I fought because it was the only way I knew to put myself back together. My phone buzzes on the kitchen counter, a text message notification. I glance at the screen, smiling when I see Emily's name. She sends photos of the kids sometimes, my grandchildren, though they don't call me Grandpa yet, just Jack or sometimes Coach, since I started teaching the older one, Thomas, some basic boxing fundamentals on weekend visits. This message is different. Dad, can you pick up Thomas from school today? Parent-teacher conference with Lily and Dave's stuck at work. Dad. She still calls me that sometimes, though more often it's just you or Jack. I've learned to accept whatever she offers, to find contentment in the slow rebuilding of what was broken. Her husband Dave is a good man, steady, kind, devoted to their children in ways that remind me of my better self from before everything fell apart. We've developed an unlikely friendship, bonding over craft beer and home renovation projects. He never tries to replace my role in Emily's life, never acts threatened by my presence. For that alone, I would respect him. I text back, of course. 3:15 at Washington Elementary. Her reply comes quickly. Yes, thanks. He's been talking about you all week. The knowledge warms me from the inside. Thomas is 7, bright, curious, with Emily's eyes and stubborn chin. He's fascinated by fighting, though Emily has strict rules about what I can teach him and when. Self-defense only, she insists. No competition until he's older. I respect her boundaries. Know better than most the cost of stepping into a cage unprepared. As I grab my keys and head for the door, I catch a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. Gray dominates my beard now, Lines fan from the corners of my eyes, some from squinting in the ring, others from learning to smile again. I'm thinner than I was at 40, more weathered, but there's a solidity to my presence that wasn't there before, a groundedness that comes from knowing exactly who I am and what I've survived. The drive to Washington Elementary takes me past the old courthouse where I lost custody of Emily all those years ago. I no longer avert my eyes when passing it, no longer feel that stab of shame and failure. Time hasn't erased what happened there, but it has changed how the memory sits within me. No longer a defining wound, but simply one chapter in a longer story. I pull into the school pickup lane 15 minutes early, turn off the engine, and wait. Watch parents arrive in their sedans and SUVs, some in business attire, others in scrubs or uniforms. Normal people living normal lives. There was a time when I envied them that normalcy, that sense of belonging to the everyday world. Now I understand that everyone fights battles invisible to others. Everyone carries wounds that don't show on the surface. The final bell rings, and children stream from the building in chaotic clusters. I spot Thomas immediately. His dark hair and lanky build make him easy to pick out from the crowd. He sees me too, face lighting up as he breaks into a run. "Coach Jack," he calls, throwing himself into my arms with the unself-conscious affection of childhood. "Did you bring your medal? You promised to show me." I laugh, ruffling his hair. "Not today, buddy, but soon. How was school?" "Boring," he sighs dramatically. "We had to do fractions." "Fractions are important," I tell him, helping him into the back seat and making sure his seatbelt is secure, especially in fighting. Timing is all about fractions of seconds. His eyes widen at this connection between schoolwork and something he considers cool. "Really? Like how?" As I drive us toward the ice cream shop, our usual Thursday ritual, I explain how mathematics underpins everything from punch combinations to weight cutting. Thomas listens with rare focus, asking questions that reveal a quick mind behind his restless energy. Looking at him in the rearview mirror, I sometimes catch glimpses of myself at that age, before doubt and disappointment resped me, when the world still seemed full of possibility. Other times I see Emily, her determination, her curiosity, her capacity for joy. In those moments, the circular nature of life feels almost overwhelming in its perfection. We haven't told him yet about the cancer. No point worrying him until we know more. The doctors are optimistic. Caught early, treatable, good prognosis. But it's still cancer. Still 6 weeks of radiation therapy starting next month. Still a reminder of mortality I wasn't quite ready to face. Emily knows. Came with me to the first consultation. Sat beside me as the doctor explained treatment options and side effects. Squeezed my hand when statistics were mentioned. "You're not going through this alone," she said afterward, in the parking lot of Springfield Medical Center, the same hospital where she was born, where she now works as a nurse practitioner. Life's strange symmetry again. I don't fear death the way I once did. Don't fear much of anything anymore. The cage taught me that most fears are paper tigers, terrifying until confronted, then revealed as manageable challenges rather than insurmountable obstacles. Pain is temporary. Loss is survivable. Change is inevitable. What I've learned in these years of fighting and healing is that love doesn't need to win to exist. It just needs to endure, to stand firm when everything else crumbles, to remain when all logical reasons for its presence have vanished. That's what I did, what I continue to do. Stand firm, endure, remain. Not because I expect anything in return, but because that's who I've become. A man who doesn't disappear when things get difficult. A man who stays. And if there's one thing I hope Thomas learns from me, one legacy I can leave that matters, it's this. Strength isn't about never falling. It's about how you rise after each fall, how you keep moving forward when retreat seems easier, how you fight not just for victory but for integrity, for self-respect, for the quiet dignity of knowing you gave everything you had to give. Because in the end, that's all any of us can do. Fight our best fight, love without guarantee, stand our ground, and trust that somewhere someone is watching and remembering, carrying forward the best parts of us long after our own battles have ended. Life rarely gives us perfect resolutions or clean endings. Sometimes the most powerful victories aren't the ones that erase our past mistakes, but the ones that help us make peace with them. Jack Lancaster didn't win back the years he lost with his daughter. He couldn't turn back time or undo the words spoken in that courtroom. But what he did was perhaps more meaningful. He found the courage to redefine himself when the world had already written him off as a failure. What would you fight for if you believed it wasn't too late? What part of yourself have you surrendered that might still be reclaimed? Jack's journey reminds us that dignity isn't something others can permanently take from us. It's something we can always choose to reclaim, even when the odds seem insurmountable. His story isn't about becoming a champion fighter. It's about refusing to disappear, refusing to accept that our worst moments define us forever. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do isn't winning the battle, but simply showing up for it, day after day, when no one else believes we should still be in the ring. If this story touched something in you, perhaps a relationship that needs mending, a dream you've abandoned, or a version of yourself you've lost along the way, remember that it's never too late to stand up again. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message today. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of extraordinary resilience and transformation. Because the most powerful stories aren't about perfect people. They're about broken people who refuse to stay broken.